So shall I begin? Am I audible to everyone?
Yes, sir, you're
Yes,
audible.
sir.
Okay, okay. So it gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to this workshop on literary modernism and the temporal dynamic of the West. So, on behalf of the entire organizing committee, the students, and everyone present, I extend my hearty welcome to our guest speaker, Dr. Shubhadeep Paul. I'm sure this is going to be an enlightening session. But before we proceed with the lecture that we are all waiting for, I would like to introduce Sir to everyone present. So, Dr. Shubhadeep Paul is presently an assistant professor in the Department of English, School of Literature, Language and Culture Studies, Bankura University, West Bengal. He has previously taught at the PG Department of English, Maulana Azad College, Kolkata. He was a co-director of a 2-year major research project, 2016 to 18, entitled Discoursing the Homeless Elderly, Tropes, Desires, Contentment. He has co-edited Anxieties, Influences, and After Critical Responses to Postcolonialism and Neocolonialism, and authored Finite Sketches, Infinite Reaches. His forthcoming co-edited volume, Beyond the Heteronorm, Interrogating Critical Alterities, has been endorsed by Lexington Books, Rowman, and Littlefield. Sir, we are eagerly waiting to hear from you. I request you to begin the session. The platform is all yours.
Okay. Right. Thank you so much. Thanks to the entire team, this very young and dynamic department. I happen to know some of you. Olonkar, Saurabh were all my direct students, and very recently I've interacted with Professor Anandita Dash, and I hope to catch up with the rest of the department as well. I would like to, before I begin, in particular, thank the Honorable Chancellor of this university, Mr. Falguni Mukhopadhyay, and the Honorable Vice Chancellor as well, Dr. Shankar Gangopadhyay. And when I was asked to speak on modernism, I was broadly offered this particular topic, which is, of course, a very porous and a very dynamic and, I guess, a very big umbrella term which accommodates and encompasses a lot of things. So I was thinking, what would be topic, the ideal topic within quotes, that would enlighten all of you, because this is an area where I can take a course for at least 3 to 6 months, and still I wouldn't. It is so vast and it is so dynamic. But having said that, we know that there are time constraints. I'll be speaking on time itself. A format to kind of go with. So I would be talking about literary modernism. I will be talking on literary modernism in particular, because I think that's what would benefit and concern most of you directly. And this would be in conjunction with what I have described in my title as the temporal dynamic of the West. I have a very brief PowerPoint presentation as well, but I'll come to that slightly later. My idea is to show you some of the select, paintings that I have come across. I've made a very, judicious handful of selections in this regard. Some very popular paintings and some rather obscure paintings that might kind of give you a formative idea about the issues that we will very broadly speak on. But Majorly speaking, if I am to take the timeline between 1900 to 1950, and of course, this is also a very, kind of categorically chosen time period. It's not that modernism doesn't begin slightly earlier, nor does it not extend slightly more. But just to kind of, take a broad rubric, we often think that, philosophy is basically an abstraction. And we believe that when we are talking about modernism, we primarily refer to the impact that, the modern period has had on the arts, variously speaking. And we often tend to believe that philosophy is an abstraction, which is very much, kind of detached from the general mainstream. Now, nothing could be farther from the truth, because I believe modernism is one of those philosophies, those movements which has had a very tangible connection with ground reality, the immediate socio-political milieu, if I'm to speak of. And what interested me is the idea that we mostly talk about space and spatiality. We talk about space in terms of, the now more very popular space theory, and different kinds of space theories are there. And we talk about space as a three-dimensional coexistent with matter and all that. But we often tend to forget that the fourth dimension that we very largely tend to take a little lightly, time, is not really a monodimensional thing. Time is not this 3 p.m. that we begin, and maybe 4:30 wherever we end. It's not just an alpha to an omega sort of thing. Time has various understandings. Time has various objectives. Time has various means of comprehension, which is going to be my object of attention and subject of inquiry. Now, having said that, I think that temporality also has had major theorizations over time itself. But I have found that that has been a sort of a scattered theorization in literary studies. It hasn't been brought together. When I speak about the temporal dynamic, I speak about it in a sense of a collective, though I must say that, it does concern a lot of varieties. It concerns a lot of heterogeneity about it, which I will try to address. And I feel that time is definitely in major ways quantifiable. It is a quantifiable, should I say, matter, but it is also in major ways a qualifiable essence. And that is what we will try to understand through various, systems of thought that have evolved over time. Now, quite interestingly, I have shortlisted to, come to the uh, main point that I am speaking on. I have shortlisted some of the major ideas concerning time. And this is to say that all these ideas are not definitely Occidental in nature, but they have been universalized over time. So one of that concerns the idea of economics, which is to do with the idea of time is money and all that. It has to do with the idea of karma, so the wheel of time coming full circle, and sin, redemption, sort of stuff. And of course, the idea of end time, that time is a sort of a recording, like as you are recording this session, which we are having live, then after a certain point of time, this will go to the past, and then we can see it innumerable number of times, depending on our necessity. So everything which begins has to end somewhere. Time itself will end somewhere because it has been started at a point of time. So this is a sort of a eschatological idea of presenting the order of things. What also interested me was the Greek idea of chronos and kairos, where the idea of chronos basically takes cognizance of the numeric idea of time. Okay, and kairos basically addresses the metaphysical quality of time, which I'll of course come to later. And not to undermine, of course, never to undermine the idea of time as cyclical processes. We have in Oriental philosophy, we have in the Vedas, for instance, the idea of yugas or yugas. Various yugas coming one after the other. And I'm sure those of you who have studied W.B. Yeats's poetry would also be familiar with the idea of time as a spiral or time as a gyre, from which, of course, various ideas about history being repeated, or history having cyclical processes of coming back in different forms come about. But majorly speaking, I think the West has been vehemently influenced by the ideas of Newton, the physicist Newton. And I think Newton was the first one to point out to the fact that time has a structural, integration with the universe. In fact, the universe will not hold itself, or of course, now we are speaking of it in terms of the multiverse, that will not hold itself if there is not a temporal regularization of things. But of course, down the line, there were philosophers like Leibniz and Immanuel Kant, who of course differed from that idea, and they believed not in the sense of event-based understanding of time, but they felt that time was a sort of a extension of things. It was in everything and out of everything. It was like God itself, whom we configure to be present in the microcosm and the macrocosm alike. Another very interesting definition of time I had found referred to the idea that was forwarded by St. Augustine of Hippo. St. Augustine had, of course, divided time in a chronological manner. So he had designated the past to memory and the present to attention. So, of course, you will not be understanding what I'm saying if you are not attentive to the present moment. And of course, from all this is generative of the idea that it will bred some future expectation. You will never do anything right now if you don't have some kind of projection about an estimated future. So there is a sort of a linear modality of the past, the present, and the future, based on which we make all our approximations. And Leibniz, of course, believed that time and space are relational. We'll come to Einstein's relativity again later. But having said that, I just don't want to kind of stick to only the scientific veracities of time. I would want to go beyond that, and I would want my students to, an immediate audience, to kind of register the fact that modernism wouldn't have really hit the nail on the head, proverbially speaking, if it hadn't been for a person called Henry Bergson. And we are all familiar of the writings and the lectures of Bergson and Bergsonian philosophy, which has had a profound influence, I would say a major, most influence on British modernism, French modernism, and definitely, down the line, other forms of modernisms that we can speak of. And Bergson had a difference with the formalistic ideas mentioned by Herbert Spencer. Bergson believed that everything is not based on the idea of mechanics of time. Time rather could be best understood in terms of the corporality with which we all exist. We are all mortal creatures. We are all conditioned by mutability. So we can best understand its impact on our lives if we understand the idea of duration, which of course comes from the French word durée. And I'm sure most of you who have studied or taught Woolf and Joyce in particular, those of you who have studied Dubliners and Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man would have definitely come across this word, the idea of la durée or duration. in English. So the idea was this, that time is mobile and time is incomplete. Time is not really a complete essence, and time is not a fixed essence either. So, since it is that, we can never register it properly. We can never have a one dimensional idea of time. Please try to understand that. Like, we often tend to feel that it was one fine morning that T.S. Eliot got up, or one fine morning that Ezra Pound got up, and they suddenly had novel ideas and they started writing wonderful poetry. No, in order to create good art, you definitely have to be very sensitive and cognizant of the immediate, critical thinking around you that is taking place. You have to understand that metaphysics is involved in almost everything that we can speak of. So I think Bergson, having said that, understood that there was an element of time, in the sense that time was within the inner life of man. This is something to be thought of. We always think that time is extrinsic to us, but it is very much possible that time is also intrinsic to us. The temporal plane of my life is not the same as the temporal plane of your life, or for that matter, somebody else's life, though we are habitating the same milieu, maybe even the same spatial locale, so on and so forth. So, time can actually speed up when we do nothing, and time can actually slow down when we are trying to do a lot of things. So, we are always trying to catch up to time, but time is never even desiring to catch up to us. So this is a very ruthless idea of the state of things. By extension, I might even say that this can be a very ruthless idea of the very comprehension of divinity, how we understand God. We understand God as a benevolent person. And of course, I'm sure all of you have by now understood that there are these concepts of the good God and the bad God, starting from right from Blake straight down to, I think, Samuel Beckett. You would understand that the idea of a benevolent God and the idea of a malevolent God, what is Godot, for instance, if I might come to Waiting for Godot also, has been the subject of much speculation. That, is our creator really benign, if there is a creator? And or for that matter, there is no creator. Isaac Newton, the greatest physicist, was very much a theist, and Stephen Hawking, for all his limitations, does not believe in God. So we have had a certain determinism about time before modernism had taken full scale. But Bergson rejects this determinism. He rejects this idea that there is an a priori causality about everything, that everything is predetermined. Like, let me very briefly ramble on this, that when I speak on when I teach Macbeth, for instance, Shakespeare's Macbeth, I used to do that in my college days, and there's this section when Macbeth realizes all his kind of plans going awry, suddenly, that maybe he has been given the wrong visionary focus by the three witches. And there is this very hardcore element in that particular play, where there is this existential realization that perhaps time is actually a pre-planned recording which is just let out. Like, as I said earlier, that you can play out this recording later and hear it over and over again. So maybe we are having parallel lives, despite being one singular identity or entity, and we are just, at this very given moment, we are playing out one particular life, but it has been codified already. So if that is the case, then where lies my free will? There is always this contention, this very proto-biblical contention between predestination and free will. And that contention is primarily leveled from the understanding of time. Had there been no temporal plane, this wouldn't really have been much of a problem, so to say. So I think Kant believed that free will can be positive. Kant believed that it can ideally be positive if we can live outside space and time. But since we cannot live outside space and time, we can never have a positive free will. This was the understanding. So there was a sort of a negative projection, if you might think of. But Bergson had defended free will. Bergson felt that no, if Dury can be measured, and if Dury could be understood in terms of spatial time, okay, which in French is temps, then if you can understand it through the idea of temps, then maybe you can have a constructivist approach to your lives. This is very well nigh possible. If you can have a codified, spatialized restraint on the progression of time, maybe you can regulate time in your lives. So it is wrong to say that modernism is always about ennui and depression and negativity, pessimism. We tend to have a very monodimensional idea of modernism, largely predicated on our understanding of T.S. Eliot. Of course, Eliot's influence is very major. Eliot himself was a very major poet. But what I must also register here is this, that Eliot had his own personal, subjective influence on his literary works, which I'll come to slightly later, which should not be universalized. There were other camps as well. And we must have this very panopticon understanding of all these literary works in order to formulate a very holistic understanding of what literary modernism was trying to do, at least British modernism was trying to do for all students of English literature, so to say. So the idea that was formed was this, that we can comprehend our reality through images. Images are perhaps the best modal vehicles for understanding our immediate reality. I'm using that term immediate reality because, of course, we inhabit different realities. Of course, there can be virtual reality, there can be cyber reality, there can be corporeal reality. Different kinds of realities are there, depending on which pill you are consuming, the red pill, the blue pill, going back to the matrix sequences. But very seriously speaking, there is this idea that Bergson had pronounced in his work Creative Evolution, 1911, that time was basically about us passing from one state to another. Okay, but not really registering how we are progressing. The truth is, we change without ceasing, but others do not understand that. You have seen me 5 years back. I am still there in your mind, the I that was there 5 years back. But by this time, maybe I have changed so vehemently that you might not be able to even recognize me once you interact with me. So you must never have value-based judgments. You must never make singular understanding of anything, so to say, because everything is subject to what Bergson had called a creative evolution. Mind you, not just evolution, a creative evolution. Okay, so this philosophy of time, if I might say, had majorly inspired modernist fictive writing or fictional writing. I'll come to the different works one by one, but those of you who are also interested in cinema would be happy to know that Gilles Deleuze, the first of the duo of Deleuze and Guattari, Deleuze had has been influenced uh, on his theorization of cinema, the idea of cinema as a form, uh, from Bergsonian ideas also, majorly speaking. And Deleuze felt that cinema is not just a lot of images strung together. Cinema is actually a continuity of a movement. It's a flux, it's a river, it's a sequence. And that sequentiality has to be registered over and over again in order to make a comprehensible sense of what we are trying to do. That is what we try to do. I very recently taught Heather at for an interdisciplinary course, the EID course as they call it, where different disciplinary students come and they participate and they try to understand how literature and cinema can actually coexist together. Because it's very easy to do that, because both the cinematic form and the literary form are ultimately texts, and texts have a finite boundary. We are all trying to do things within a fixed comprehensible idea of time, a teleological idea of time. But I think that modernism, for all its periodizing umbrella ideas, had been also majorly contested from within. So while Bergson was becoming an international figure, making his pronouncements, and of course everyone starting from the very elite Virginia Woolf belonging to the Bloomsbury group, right down till Catherine Mansfield in New Zealand, everyone was getting influenced by Henry Bergson. So Bergson was definitely a very major influence. But there were people who were also kind of, rallying against Bergsonian ideas, who were not really very supportive of the ideas that he was trying to kind of formulate. If you read the writings of Graham Howe and Laura Riding, Robert Graves, to a big extent, then you would understand that there are Percy Wyndham Lewis. You would understand that there are a lot of people who were kind of resisting this time cult that had become, this very romanticization, this very subjective romanticization of the idea of time. That I'm not going to register the fact that time is, progressing. It's 3:32 right now, and I'm just in my head. I'm happy to dream that it is midnight, and I'm writing An Acre of Grass like W.B. Yeats, and I'm very happy doing that. Is just a subjective wallowing of things. No, it can't happen that way. So there is a linearity about time. But I have condensed a lot of arguments for the lack of time itself, the lack of chronological time, or clock time as we call it. Because what is very contentious and very ironical also in a certain way is that there is, or there has never been, a very singular way of understanding and measuring time. You know, you are measuring time by looking at the clock. You are looking at the clock based on Indian Standard Time, IST. But I have an hourglass. I really don't have this fancy imported watch that I'm wearing. Okay, I kind of have an hourglass, and the sands of time, proverbially and literally, are slipping in front of my eyes, and I am measuring time that way. So I can even do that through based on measurements on the number of times a pendulum is oscillating. I can look at a sea clock and have a different nautical understanding of time. I can sit on a particular at a particular lighthouse, and I can have a very marine understanding of time. And of course, if I go to space, I will have a different idea of time altogether. So it can never imply that we will have a very singular, a very monodimensional, universal notion of time. Please try to just understand this this very strategic, formulaic idea of time, right? Now, Of course, before I come to the slides, I would just come to the slides. I would want to mention that the examples, the literary examples that I will be giving to substantiate my argumentation are a handful of selections, but of course there can be innumerable number of other citations that you can choose to offer. I will definitely welcome some observations from all of you, especially the students towards the end. If you have any personal register on the way time has kind of influenced your own lives, or for that matter your literary understanding of any particular text, that would be welcome definitely towards the end. But let me start with a brief PowerPoint presentation when I am going to kind of show you some paintings, select handful of paintings, and I'm going to speak very little on that. That will give you a certain idea of what I'm trying to talk on. And that will be a sort of a prelude to my observations on literary examples. Because you see, literature, at least modernist literature, was heavily influenced by the other cultural, germinal generations that were taking place parallelly. I'm sure that if I was writing modernist poetry at that point of time when T.S. Eliot was writing, it couldn't be that I haven't heard about the painters and their works, or the philosophers and their essays and abstracts and tracts. So it was basically an interdisciplinary, compilation that was shaping up. So let me show you some of the pictures, and then we can proceed with the textual analysis. Let me show you a PowerPoint. Just give me 2 minutes for that. Is it visible?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Yes.
Okay, I'll just maximize it. Yeah, it's visible. Now, have a look at some of the important, pronouncements that had come about in the cultural world at large. This is a work which is called Synthesis of Human Dynamism. This statue had kind of been broken at a point of time, but what you can see is there is this futurist projection of the human dimension. You can see that the forms are kind of being slipping into differential equations down the line, and you can see spatial continuity, what might very generally seem to be a human body, but tending to kind of be motivated across a dynamic plane. So there is human dynamism involved in the entire thing. I'm sure most of you are aware of these two paintings. These two are enormously popular paintings. The first is The Persistence of Memory by Salvador Dali, and the second is by Edvard Munch. It's called The Screen. And I'm sure most of you will be cognizant of the fact of the idea of melting clocks. This is a very surrealistic projection, super realism, so to say, where the painting shows you a very kind of barren landscape, but there is a possibility of water body on the extreme side, and the clocks are melting and literally hung out to dry as if, and the trees are without vitality and leaves. And of course the screen talks about that profound, very volatile epiphanic moment when there is this sudden realization of the existential horror of our lives, a very subjective realization where this riot of colors all around seem to meet and merge and create a very grim spectacle of things. And of course the black marble clock. Please note that the clock metaphor, the clock symbol, the symbol of the clock image recurs in many different paintings. You may have a look at some of the other paintings on the internet, and you would see that some of the painters, as in the case here, had experimented with dark colors, visibly black, and other dark colors, in order to kind of suggest a certain dark milieu, in order to suggest a certain metaphorical darkness that had descended upon the milieu. The other painting being homeward bound, you can see the image of a horse. You can also see the image of a train. You can see the natural and the mechanistic. And of course, you can see the clouds that also seem to be in a state of progression. And there is a sort of linear rush towards some unidentifiable destination, if I might say. But please note that there is that sun, very, very, tiny right at the middle. And the diurnal notion of our lives doesn't really completely go away. Though I think the smoke, the clouds, the color of the horse, they tend to fuse in terms of a certain blackness of, existential rush, if I might say. Of course, modernism, as I will talk about in the literary examples, concerns time shifts. This is a work by Kenneth Miller. It's called Waiting for the Bus. And I'm sure that you would be able to identify the general theme of waiting for Godot from this very motif of waiting. If you understand that it is in the present continuous, that the gerund ing is there. It's not the wait for Godot. It's not a wait for Godot. It is waiting for Godot. It's a perpetual now, which never seems to go away. But in this case, of course, there is this waiting for a vehicle to arrive. And this has been a very common motive of the modern period. This has been a general idea of modernity itself, that we have to start off somewhere and we have to reach an end destination. And we have to do that quickly. The quicker we do that, the better it is for us, the more productive and utilitarian we can be. And we do not have all our lives. We cannot go at a bullock cart pace to reach our destinations. So it is definitely easy if you take the tube. It is all the more easier if you take the bullet train. So the better your communication modality, the better your lives are. But then look at these people. They have arrived early. They are waiting for the bus. Once they get on the bus, they will question to themselves, when will they reach their destination? So there is a perpetual limbo that we are, we can definitely identify with. And the other picture, the other painting, of course, suggests the introduction of the telegraph. You can see a telegraph pole against the general sky. And of course, you can see that this very cableization of the entire city, this very networking, electric networking of the entire city. We had ignored Tesla at that point of time, and we had gone through cables and wires and all that. Maybe now we will be doing wireless in a major way, even when it comes to electric transportation. And at that point of time, maybe electricity changed everything. There is a saying that just imagine your life without electricity for one day. How would it be? Would you be still leading modern lives? Your phones, your mobiles will not charge, your laptops will not operate, your PowerPoint will not be, your projectors will not work. Nothing will basically work. You will go back to the dark ages, literally and proverbially speaking. This is, of course, another very important sculpture. It's by Charles Stapin, and you can see that it's made of bronze, the original sculpture. This is a stone edifice where the mortal aspect of time is given. I'm sure most of the students, definitely the faculty here, have read that very, very popular poem by Andrew Marvell, To His Coy Mistress, which basically predicts itself on a tripartite structure. That had we but world enough and time, but at my back I always hear. And finally, therefore, what do we have to do about it? We have to outrun time. We have to rush with time. We have to make as we say, in a rather carpe diem sense, we have to make the most of time in our lives, before time outdoes us, or has us outdone in major ways, so to say. And of course, this particular painting by Turner is a turn on for me, because as you can see that, rain, steam, and speed, I can very well see that intermingling of the natural and the artificial, the anthropocentric and the biocentric, kind of getting fused in a riot of colors which are also very heterodimensional in nature. You see, the colors are also merging into themselves, among themselves, just as the images are also merging among themselves. But very faintly, I'm sure you can see maybe a particular building structure. You can see steam coming out, and you can see a very faint image of a bridge, perhaps, towards the left. And in general, you can see a very, rain-filled day. So it's a very moist, surrounding everywhere. This, I think, was very prototypical of modernism, where, there was this very confusion and collusion of different purposes, so that the traditional realist vein of things, the very traditional, very easily understood, very well comprehended essence of things that has come about since the Enlightenment era, is no longer holding good. We are having a heap of broken images, and during moments when the images are not broken, they are all fused up. So that's an interesting sense that kind of, modernism as an aesthetic movement definitely offers us. And of course, this is the very, very famous Guernica by Pablo Picasso. And of course, I have mentioned the context of this particular painting in the first writing on the top. As you can see, during 1937, this was during the Spanish Civil War. The Basque town of Guernica was bombed by Nazi Germany. And of course, this painting commemorates the horrors of the bombings. Why do I give this painting? How is it related to the idea of, spatio-temporal progression? This is very important, because it is very much what the West had done to the East in course of the atomic explosions, the atom bomb droppings at Nagasaki and Hiroshima. These kind of bomb droppings was done by Nazi Germany, not so much on a nuclear scale, but definitely on a catastrophic scale, on other countries like Poland and maybe some of the smaller nations. And this captures the horrors of the moment when perhaps things disintegrated. You can see a very fractural idea of the state of things. It's very aporetic in that sense. It's very much broken up. It's basically a heap of broken images where time suddenly seems to come to a standstill, where even the spatial organization of things seem to collapse. And this painting was not a small painting. This was a giant mural-sized painting. So it definitely does a maximization of a sense of collapse, which is what I was trying to get. I'll come to postmodernism later, maybe, though that's not the immediate subject of my inquiry. But let me very briefly mention that postmodernism is an equally debated, philosophical entity or idea or study, which is also very contentious. A lot of people believe that postmodernism begins where modernism seems to end. They also believe, as the following slide shows, that postmodernism is modernism with the optimism taken out. This is by Robert Hewison. But it would be wrong to say that postmodernism is an acceptance of everything, a very casual acceptance of everything, and modernism is always about horror and shock. That's a broad definition, but I believe that not all the modernists were sufficiently horrified. Not all of them dealt with their horror and terror in the same way. Perhaps Joyce did it differently from Conrad. So the registers, the critical registers, are definitely different from one another. And some critics believe that postmodernism is a continuation of modernism. So basically, yes, we do come to the counterculture movement and the late 60s, 70s, 80s, the pre-millennial era, where there has been a casual acceptance of things due to maybe increasing powers of capitalism and heteronormativity and so on and so forth, maybe because of the rise of increasing rise of neoliberalism and similar trends, that there was a commodification of basically everything. Maybe it is because people were gradually coming out of the horrors of the two world wars, especially the Second World War, that they were trying to understand things differently from a commercial aspect. So yes, these contentions are definitely there, but very largely speaking, it is believed that postmodernism is anti-mind. It tends to critique virtually everything, whereas modernism is very pro-mind. Tries to escape the mind and its problems. It basically deals with the mind. When you try to run away from the fates is to rush to find them. In a similar manner, to run away from the demons of your life is basically to interrogate them and visit them in a renewed manner. So that has what modernism has been, very broadly speaking. There is also a trend towards going beyond postmodernism also. And of course, we come to the idea of metamodernism, and this very influential book by Amanda and Storm basically points to that, the future of theory, as they call it. And I'm sure you look at the cover image and you would understand this, this very image that you see on the interiority of the face is not just a very cosmic state of things, but a very digital state of things. We come to a digitalized understanding of our lives. And of course, one of my areas of interest is post-humanism. Many of you would know that I have been researching in post-humanism also for a very long time, into digital humanities and into transhumanism and stuff like that, which is more contemporary, which is definitely post-millennial. But I will not go into that because that will be stretching things a bit too far. Where I think there are, multiple modes of the real that we tend to encounter every day, and instead of dealing with everything from a sense of, or from a perspective of fragmentation, or dealing with everything from a perspective of absolute surrender, that let whatever come, let things bear themselves out. I am not going to have any involvement in them. So it's neither a state of utter shock, nor is it a state of utter complacency. It's basically a tendency towards inclusivity. We are trying to fuse knowledge with value. And that is what I keep telling all my students, that unless you fuse knowledge with value, you would have a very neoliberal idea of knowledge. You'd basically measure it in only your API and other score sheets, which would have definitely an immediate impact, but definitely not a long-term impact, so to say. These are some of the works that I have referred, so we'll come to that later. Let me sign out from here, and let me come back to the original screen. Yeah. Okay, so I'm sure all of you could see the images. A very handful select number of images that I had shown. And now, what I would very briefly try to do is to show some literary examples, which you will find very much in conjunction with the images, the ideas that we had seen in in the images of the paintings that are there. I hadn't chosen photographs because that would take things to a different level. And I believe that photography has more to do with post-modernism rather than modernism, because photography, as Amitav Ghosh mentions in The Glass Palace, is perhaps the greatest invention of the 20th century, the latter half of the era. And of course, modernism itself comprises of several, milieus. There's the early modernism, there is high modernism, there is end modernism. So everything is not the same, through all the eras. But I will very judiciously make a handful selection for your enlightenment, and let us see what we have here. First, let me talk a little bit about Virginia Woolf. All of you had encountered the ideas of the stream of consciousness and the idea of interior monologue in Woolf, and especially in Joyce. And I would also say that when I teach novels, or when you will be teaching novels and learning, reading novels like Mrs. Dalloway, or for that matter, To the Lighthouse, Orlando, and stuff like that, you would understand that there is this idea of a personal time. This is very much there. And if you had understood Waiting for Godot, you would understand that what Vladimir and Estragon, they very cardinally miss, is not just the arrival of Godot, but the sense, this very vague sense, that they had a very endearing personal time before which something catastrophic happened. Maybe a nuclear explosion, maybe they were driven out from their countries. Something catastrophic which is not explained had happened and had robbed them of this idea of personal time, where they don't have any sequence of events. It's basically waiting for the same thing. It's waiting for some kind of deliverance, which is also not explained, because Beckett himself had mentioned that when he was interrogated, that if I know who Godot was, and if I knew what Vladimir and Estragon were waiting for, I would have mentioned it in the text, or I would have told you, but I myself don't know. So it's perhaps part of that existential quest. Maybe even nihilism comes into this, where nihilism and absurdism, collate into a very weird entity that makes things very inexplicable for us. In the case of Mrs. Dalloway, what I find is this, that her thoughts are not very much in terms of a synced progression. She sees the predictable, or she hears the predictable chime of the Big Ben, and I would consider the Big Ben as a symbol of patriarchy's temporal organization of things. Not just Big Ben, of course, the other edifices, official edifices around, like the Parliament and other stuff that is there. It's very much patriarchal. It's very ordered, and she does not have a direct register with this idea of time, though she can hear the Big Ben. Everyone can hear the Big Ben. The Big Ben makes itself heard, just as patriarchy gets into your lives, even if you don't want to. Those of you who do a bit of gender studies would know this, that we must constantly try to resist patriarchy's intrusion. But there is always this belated feeling that somewhere, due to maybe the legal arrangements of the state of things, maybe due to our collectivist social thinking, patriarchy gets into us. So it regiments time. Patriarchy regiments time. Right? It does a regimentation of time, but Mrs. Dalloway does not get regimented. I quote from the text: "For having lived in Westminster, how many years now? A suspense before Big Ben strikes, a warning, musical, then the hour, irrevocable." Mind you, the hour is irrevocable. Once gone, it will not come back. The leaden circles dissolved in the air. This is page 3 to 4, right at the very beginning. Okay, so most of these English novelists, like Joyce and Woolf, they were very much influenced by two people. The first one I had very much, categorically mentioned towards the beginning of my lecture, Bergson, and the other is Marcel Proust. Okay, so Proust's writing in French, especially Remembrance of Things Past, In Search of Lost Time. That's more major than Remembrances. Um, uh, is an a sharp reminder of the fact that involuntary memories affect us more than literal time. There is this narrator whose name is Marcel, uh, as in Proust's own eponymous configuration, and he has involuntary childish memories visit him when he has a bite of a Madeleine cake with tea, and he gets transported to his childhood. Doesn't the same thing happen with us when we get a particular fragrance or a perfume, or we see something and it just basically transports us back to time? So time is in the now, but we are doing this to and fro movement. We are going back, we are going forth. We are not staying at the regular order of time because we are not mechanistic creatures. We are not mechanized, no matter how much we try to be. Our ontologies we try to mechanize, but our epistemologies can never be fully mechanized. That is my take on the whole thing, basically. Okay, so the same happens with Joyce. Joyce takes a mythological panorama in the case of Ulysses, where if we compare it with the traditional epic, the Greek epic, where there is a linear grand progression of things, that Ulysses goes out in search of grand adventures, and he will come back with booty and bounty. But the same doesn't happen in the case of Ulysses in the modern period. Definitely not in the case of his wife Molly Bloom, who gets into a number of relationships. Most of them, sometimes she cannot comprehend as to why she's getting into them, but maybe out of different compulsions. There is this kind of subjective investments that we can think of. And of course, I had seen in the case of John Dopasso, the novelist, where there is this very plasticity of urban spaces, especially the cityscapes, and where this visual eclectic frenzy of Manhattan, I'm talking about the novel Manhattan Transfer, gets into his mind and creates a jarring effect. If you look outside a high-rise window and you see a lot of cars speeding at night, you would have a sense of this very cinematic idea of light traveling. But it's not the case that your thoughts would also travel like that light. Your thoughts might be a corresponding slowdown that you can never think of. In the case of Pirandello, for instance, you have a dramaturgy of time itself. I'm sure most Calcutta University students would have done Six Characters in Search of an Author. And you would know that with Pirandello, I think contexting, placing anything in any given context is always an ambiguous investment. You can never really fully fathom a given moment in terms of a singular meaning only. So meaning becomes plurisignified in major ways. I'm not going into some of the maybe less syllabi-oriented artists like Tom Wolfe and Mikhail Bulgakov and Gertrude Stein and all that. I'm not going into the American novelists majorly. But let me come to T.S. Eliot, since I was speaking on Eliot before. And I will speak on Eliot very briefly also, because I think time is running out. Eliot had personally, let me share this anecdote with you, that he had personally attended Bergson's lectures. And there is no denying the fact that Eliot is perhaps one of the most erudite and cryptic modernist poets that we know of. Whenever in any job interview you are asked a question on T.S. Eliot, you immediately, your feet turns cold, because you know that this invites a plethora of allusions and interpretations. And Eliot, interestingly, had pursued a PhD, gone to pursue a PhD at Harvard, and this also revolved around Bergsonian ideas. And I think I would select the poem Rhapsody on a Windy Night to kind of, illustrate what I'm talking about. Eliot never genuinely believed, like Bergson, that pure duration could overcome the spurious context or concept of time. Time is very spurious. And if you can configure duration within a spatial dimension, your lives would become very progressive overnight. Eliot did not believe that. Let us understand that Eliot dealt with his depressions. He dealt with his psychosomatic disorders. He had taken recourse to medical help. He had spent long days in sanatoriums and semi-retirements, where he had experienced what I call a time lull, a stagnation with time. So his differences with Bergson ultimately, merged and concatenated into the 1913 lectures on inconsistencies in Bergson's idealism. This is a very important lecture, if you can read it. And Eliot had this, subjective understanding of time that he was very, very, very sure of. He was very upright about, and he could not romanticize this militarization of the clock, so to say. And if you look at these lines, I will quote a couple of lines. The bed is open. The toothbrush hangs on the wall. Put your shoes by the door. Sleep. Prepare for life. Just think about it. Look at the last phrase. Prepare for life. It's hardly life if this is what life is all about, that you prepare your bed and you brush your teeth, put your shoes by the side door, you go back to sleep, you get up in the morning, and this is this what we wake up to every day? I think that most of the things that I have done in my life, all the good things and the bad things, is out of sheer boredom. Because if you do not have boredom, if you think that boredom is negative, then I'm sure you will completely minus all creativity from your life. You have to be bored. You have to be at unrest in order to make generative, sense of your lives. Because every day is a generation, and every day is a new generation, which we call regeneration. That is something I think Eliot had consistently tried to grapple with. And sorry to say that he doesn't give a very, not at all a very romantic, far from that. He was definitely very much of an anti-romantic. And he doesn't give a very positive view of life also. He understands life in terms of the vacant lots. You remember preludes, and you remember Prufrock etherized on a table. You remember these images. They tend to kind of haunt you, whether it's your memory or whether it's your desire. These days we are doing a lot of memory studies in different realms. But I believe that memory studies is not just about what had already happened in the past. Memory studies is also about the future. It's also about what is going to come. It's also our comprehension of the future. It's also our understanding of the future. Okay. And having said that, I believe that even there are charges by some lesser known romantics like Percy Wyndham Levy. I had mentioned his name right at the very start. His very important work, Time and Western Man. You can read this. This is going to be very profitable. This was released in 1927, Time and Western Man, where he kind of, admonishes this very solipsistic idea of time. What is this? You are saying time is something to you, I'm saying time is something to me. How are we going to make a civilizational sense of our lives if this is going to happen? So he was very much against this, sheer subjective romanticization of time. But I do not agree with Levy, because I believe that all these modernists, no matter how subjective they were definitely subjective, though they were not really always more subjective than the romantics themselves, who were always about I, me, myself, I fall on the thorns of life, I bleed. They were actually speaking about a collective collapse, And if you read To the Lighthouse, you would understand that there are many ways, not just To the Lighthouse, many other works as well. You will realize that there are many ways where global conflict and domestic unrest, they become relational, they come together. The public and the private, they come together. If you look at Sylvia Plath's poetry down the line, you'll also find that the whole range of confessional poetry, for instance, is not just about my independent confessions. It's also about how you identify with me. That thing is very much there. I will definitely also talk about very briefly, just in passing, about phrases like myriad of impressions, innumerable atoms. Everything is there in a plural sense. I was referring to Virginia Woolf's Modern Fiction. I'm sure all of you have read that essay from the common reader, that the mind is a myriad of impressions. And perhaps if you try to understand your mind, and you can understand your mind, then maybe you can understand time better. But if you can't understand your mind, if you are at a loss with your existential reality, then you will also not be able to make sense of time. And time will have a different meaning for you. Time will maybe, when we speak about psychological time, will tend to have a sort of a slowdown, cessation of the state of things. You might find yourself in what we call these days as within a time chaos. You might not be having that requisite strength to invest yourself for a subjective transcendence. You will not be able to do that, right? I will end my lecture, because I want to start a brief conversation with you, if you have any observations. With reference to Catherine Mansfield, I refer to Mansfield because I'm very fond of Mansfield, and I am aware of the politics that had sidelined Mansfield, especially from the Bloomsbury group and all that. I'm sure you know about this very literary history of Mansfield writing from the margins, Mansfield writing from New Zealand, and of course she's also in a way writing back to the center in her own way. And there is this Bloomsbury group right at the heart of England, spearheaded by Virginia Woolf and her ilk. So writing back from the center, from the margins, is also a very differential way of doing things. This is very dear to me because I have had the good fortune of teaching both in metropolitan areas, some of the best institutions, and also from the margins, from the non-metropolitan areas, which is also very revelatory in many different ways. And when you politicize the center and the margin, as has often happened in modernist writing, some people call it elite. Down the line, you will have the movement poets and others who rallied against the modernists and who wanted a more democratized, projection of art. So in the Garden Party, I've not selected any of her stories, but I have selected this particular work called The Garden Party, which I find very intriguing, because the party is basically divided into two parts. One, before the party starts, and two, after the party ends. So there is a schemata. This will prove to you that modernists were not always wishy-washy. Oh, these guys come and they take a joint and then they suddenly go into a dream lull and they start uttering gibberish. It's not that, there is a very neat structurization. And that kind of a structural entity we find in the garden party as well, because before the party, there is accelerated time. After the party, there is a deacceleration of time, especially when, uh, there is a sense of time lapse that takes place after a realization of what is happening. So the sense is this, that we cannot always configure time, the temporal praxis of our lives in a one-dimensional manner. Modernist writing definitely takes into account this spatio-temporal experimentations that I have very briefly tried to show to you. And if you make sense of these spatio-temporal projections, maybe a majority of the thematic concerns that modernist literature has to do with will become more and more understandable to you. Thank you very much for your patience and cooperation. With that, I formally end my lecture here. And I welcome all kinds of, comments, observations, questions, whatever it is that comes from your side. Thank you.
Okay, students, so if any of you have any questions or comments to me, please raise your hand. We will address that one by one. Tapojo?
Sir, my name is Tatparjo Mitra.
Tatpaj.
Uh, I guess I mainly have a comment, which is just how relevant what you said is to our contemporary world. Uh, Currently on the internet, in the many small communities in the internet, which I have the misfortune of sometimes discovering, I have found very small cults which are almost horrified by the idea that their time might never end due to the quantum mechanics theory, the many universe theories. They are horrified by the idea that they are quantumly immortal, that their time will never end. And so it is very interesting that you talked about how relevant time is to our culture and literature and society. So it is very interesting.
Yes, Tatporjo, I feel that your comment is very Tatporjo Purno. It is definitely very relevant, as it suits your name also. Which is this, that yes, you speak about quantum physics, and that definitely comes into being, because I really didn't go into Einstein and Hawkins and all that into this configuration of understanding, but I believe that there are different ways of dealing with time or making sense of time. You know, uh, I have heard about, when I do post-human studies, for instance, there is this idea of how, we are turning transhuman, and maybe we can make a better sense of things if we come out of our anthropocenic sense of progress and grand narratives that shape our lives. Okay, if we just surrender our egos and we think very nominally of us as part of a biocentric world, not as the roof and crown of creation, as Tennyson had pointed out, but as part of the world, as ultimately, contributing something just because we like to do that, but not really competing with each other or trying to reach somewhere or trying to make a certain projection, whether it's true or false. It's just that we are being comfortable in our skin. I think that has largely come about in recent times, because after the pandemic, what really struck me, and I've never really thought about things like this. Uh, the Anthropocene is literally on the wane. And post the Capitalocene, I think we have already entered the era of the Virocenes, So, what major thing are we going to do with our lives? There is this belated sense that everything has been done, and we are not now into content creation, but we are into content replication in many different ways. So yes, that affects time in a major way. It is okay. You are studying 24/7. You want to top the exam. That's fine. You study for 5 days. There is no harm if you study for 6 days and, like God Himself, take the 7th day off and do absolutely nothing. Just think about your life. Just think about what you're going to do next in the next 7 days or 1 year, or you take a self declared sabbatical for yourself without taking a leave from your institution, of course. And you take a sabbatical on your own, and you try to do the things that interest you, not for profit all the time, but for your own subjective utilization of time, not in a utilitarian manner, but in terms of an experience, in terms of almost a religious investment of things. So that way, I think, yes, cults will come and cults will go, but I think what you do with your life will remain. That is important. Yeah, I think we have another question, Lalit. Uh,
Yes, sir. Sir,
yeah,
first of all, good evening.
great.
And I have observed something like there is always a war between us and time. The one who manages they won. Like time manages us, time won, and we got defeated. We are preparing
Yeah,
for a few things, and we are just ignoring the time management and all these things. So what time will do? Time is a dynamic process. It is always in a mobile motion. So it manages us, and uh, we can say it destroy, because
us also. Yeah.
we have seen an example like the COVID situation, the COVID
Yeah, yeah.
pandemic.
Mhm.
It was like a few countries like Japan, Taiwan has completely affected and majorly affected, and we can say on the sort of destroy. But actually what happens, other countries like India and other few countries who developed their technologies and their essential things, they came out from this situation rapidly. So,
Absolutely.
sir, I have a question, and also that was my observation. I have that question that you have mentioned somewhere like live out of time and space. So, is there any possibility that we can live out of time and space, because time is constant and space is unlimited?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, you see, there is this point that, of course, there is this rubric of the clock time that you mentioned. In all my examples, at least the literary examples that I've given you, have you ever seen the concept of the clock being totally ignored? No. You haven't seen that the clock has been thrown away. Even in that painting of the melting clocks, the clocks are melting. Clocks, well, whatever it is, time is melting actually. Our sense of time is melting. Now, what has to be understood after a reading of these novels and poetry and all that, all the different genres that we speak of, is basically this: that there isn't any monodimensional idea of time, but there are moments of time. Okay, there can be this very immediate moment when in 1 hour you learn, you practice so many things that becomes a memory to cherish all your lives. And it can also be that you get up in the morning, and through the entire diurnal process of the day, nothing positive happens during the whole day. You can do absolutely nothing. You are not in a mental state to do it. You are tremendously embittered with yourself. But in both cases, you get the same clock time. That was my point, you see. So this sense of time has to be interiorized. it has to be made productive, and the productivity of it depends on you, because what is productive for you may not be productive for me. What was productive for me 10 years back is not productive for me right now. You know, at every state of your life, you will feel that you have arrived somewhere. You need to go somewhere. I'll very briefly give an example of that novel by Jhumpa Lahiri, The Lowland. I think I had the good fortune of reading that some months back. And there is this example of a mother and her daughter. You know, the mother is a very careeristic academic, but the daughter leads a life which is completely different. You know, she leads a life which is very pro earth. She doesn't visit the departmental stores, and she doesn't lead a commercial life. She doesn't need all the brand products for her living. She basically grows grocery and vegetables and stuff at her own back garden. So it's a differential way of looking at things. You know, maybe we have come to that state where we can think about it. 20 years back, not so back, I think 15 years back, I'm not that old, 15 years back, I was having this idea that, well, this is how property should be made, this is how money should be saved, this is how investments for the future should be done. I don't have that much now, because I've seen a lot of people pass away in the last 1.5 years. I have had a very dear friend of mine. Thankfully, he was saved, but that was only because of the fact that due to a particular ministerial help, he could purchase oxygen cylinders to the tune of 20,000 rupees a cylinder during the high point of the COVID crisis. Not everyone could do that. So this sense of precarity that we are living right now, and there is no guarantee that we will be fully be able to come out of this, or there will not be repetition of the same viral cycles down the line. Our understanding of time, and maybe the way Eliot and others had seen that, when the Second World War had tripled the horrors of the First World War, and that led to a sense of absurdism and nihilism everywhere, is relatable, isn't it? So these are the configurations that I think we have to very holistically keep in mind, in a holistic sense. And that may enrich our understanding of not just our individual lives, but our collective lives as well. Right. Yeah.
So any other questions?
Anything, I'll be happy to. It's for your benefit only that I am here.
The one
Because
question I would like to
your
ask.
faculty members know all these things. You know, it's nothing new to them. It's just for your benefit that I'm here. Yeah.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yeah, Ankom, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. So actually, we have been talking about this relativity of time and everything as a modernist approach. But I mean, if we can take a look at like Macbeth, it is a Shakespearean tragedy, Macbeth. There also we see that this relativity of time as a crucial aspect. I mean, the play itself starts with the witches asking when shall we meet and all of that. So would it be right to say that this time relativity existed much before the modern
Oh
era?
yeah,
I mean, the Elizabethan
that
ages
is
and all
that
of that.
is exactly, that is the reason why I had mentioned Macbeth in the course of my lecture. Though Macbeth is not quote unquote a modernist work, though it is very much a modern work in many different ways, but it's not a modernist work. If you know the difference between modernity, modernism, or modernisms these days in the plural. Well, you see, for any idea to be theorized, it can take place in any milieu. This is not to say that existentialism as an ontological experience did not exist before existentialism as a theory came about. That would be a very wrong way of defining things. And Macbeth and time are very integral partners, because if you want to delve into that, you have to understand that Shakespeare had, personal conceptions of time. Shakespeare was very aware of the state of mutability to which we are all projected, whether we are talking about the sonnets or whether we are talking about the final play. You will find the idea of time, coming out of time, time scales, time cycles very much in operation. All in war against time, as somebody had pointed out, raging against time. Why against time? Because ultimately our corporalities mean that we will lose this ontological dimension of the human body. No matter how wealthy you are, no matter how beautiful you are, no matter how prosperous you are all going to go to the dust. That's the basic idea. So this becomes all the more complicated because Macbeth is a play where the protagonist, or I don't know what to call him, the contagonist, if not the antagonist, uh, does things his own way. He wants to listen to prediction, and yet he wants to do things his way. So there is an inherent contradiction in the Shakespearean tragic heroes. We normally study the Shakespearean tragic heroes in a rather partial sense. The other day I was listening to a lecture where somebody was saying that yes, Hamlet is an outright villain, and I perfectly agree with that. Yes, that is true, that his actions are perfectly villainous. But we never say that because we are more or less attuned to the fact that he's a tragic victim in his own right. We attribute several complexes to that. So yes, in response to your observation, I think that we will live within a temporal praxis because that is how we are projected in the sense of a collectivity. But mind you, other than our collective lives, we are all islands. We are all trapped in our mono-isolationism. It might be that all of you are attending my class. I don't know how many students, but there are 2 students who are sleeping. They have come because their teachers have said that you have to come tomorrow. A particular sir is going to give a lecture and you have to come. And you turn on, you sign in, and you don't have your video on, so you can sleep. We have also been students at a particular point of time. So my question is, are you there with me or are you not there with me? It's difficult to answer, isn't it? It's like the other day I was telling someone, what if a person has half of his body inside the door and half outside the door? Are you in or are you out? Difficult to say. You are in a halfway position. Aren't we in a similar halfway position in most cases? And that is where I think clock time and duty or duration, the differential outlines of both the two were identified during this particular period. And that is what these writers were, these poets, these dramatists were majorly interested in. Let me refer to Mrs. Dalloway. I was talking about that when the novel opens, you see that Peter Walsh, sitting in a park, and he is definitely there in the here and the now. He sees another bench, a couple, a pair of lovers, but does he actually see them? No. Having looked at them, he is transported to his youth, and he thinks about his frustrated relationship with Clarissa, not Mrs. Dalloway, not as the title suggests. She hadn't become Mrs. Dalloway there. His failed relationship. And the novel takes off from there. Right, so why were we introduced to the now when we don't remain in the now? Because the now doesn't matter. This is not a novel about that anonymous couple. This is a novel about this couple who would have made a beautiful couple. But had it not been for the fact that Mrs. Dalloway had married Richard and she became Mrs. Dalloway, which is another part of the story altogether. So you must understand this, that spatio-temporal praxis, this idea that we are talking about, is definitely not monodimensional. Unless we understand this interiority of time, what sense we make of time, time as an eternal slippage hardly means anything to us. If I might say, if I'm not a part of this multiverse, does that time on Jupiter not matter to me? It does. But in many ways, it hardly does, because I'm not living on Jupiter. I'm living on planet Earth. But it does have an impact on me. If something cataclysmic happens in Jupiter and an asteroid comes forth, it enters Earth, I'm doomed. I'm annihilated. But as of now, I don't think about that, because my spatio-temporality has been limited by me to a given periphery. Now, it is up to you whether you want to delimit yourself into a certain projection or you want to expand yourself to a certain projection. That is what I was talking about. Yeah. Interesting questions. You have got very good students, Alankar. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Rather, I would say that the lecture was enlightening enough to provoke such questions among the students.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, there is a question in the chat box. Post-humanism, epistemology. See, everything is epistemological. Epistemology basically concerns the study of knowledge in general, not just knowledge as an abstract idea, but also knowledge systems. Post-humanism is it's a completely different terrain. It's not that post-humanism is very recent, because I think many of you might have watched the movie Blade Runner. That was, I think, in the 1980s that had come. Harrison Ford, and the very concept of the replicants that had come about, who were questioning the domain of our existence. How enlightened are we? From the 80s till the 90s, we had come to the era of the cyborgs, and we have had about man machines and machines coming from the future to save us. We have had the Terminator sequence movies. We have had the Matrix movies. So this is actually a vast coterie. But post-humanism is about a progressive view of things, where technology, art, uh, human life, they come together and account for a collectivist entity. But then not every thinking is like this. There are scholars, there are schools that believe that we are the main virus on the planet. We are threatening other species. So the first thing that we should start doing is by ending our lives. We should introduce this project where the human population has to be terribly controlled in order to make sense on this planet. If you get to watch at least the movie version, I'm not recommending the novel. If you don't get time for the novel, at least watch the movie partially, Dan Brown's Inferno. You will get an idea of what I'm trying to say. But there is also this general thought that ultimately technology is going to be greater than us, because humans usually take the bad side of things. We are freaks. It remains contentious as to what degree can we be angels, so to say. We are already living in a demonological age, as Amitav Ghosh points out in the novel Gun Island, that things have already gone out of control in the era of the climate catastrophes. And we are basically ruled by demons and a sense of demonological understanding of things. So in this context, I do not know how to be hopeful, how to really spell out that we should be doing this and we shouldn't be doing that. But yes, post-humanism does not advocate an end for anyone. It rather tries to, take accountability for our actions. I have had the good fortune of interviewing one of the world's most leading post-humanists, Francesca Ferrando. And on one hand, she is saying that we should embrace the best of technology for human benefit. And on the other hand, she is also saying that not a single tree, not a single tree should be cut from this time onwards. Doesn't matter if it is entering your gate, doesn't matter if it is blocking a road, you must build structures that makes the tree inclusive. You cannot cut a single tree. So yes, different branches of thought come in, environmental sciences and many other schools of thought come into this. But then that's a different territory. Maybe in some other lecture we'll talk about that. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah, Tatporjo again. Yeah, has a question, maybe. Yes, Tatporjo, I can hear you.
uh, this is a completely hypothetical question. Technically, we as humans are just another leaf floating down the temporal Niagara Falls. We can't do anything about that. Can it then be said that as humans, the most independent, freest thing we can do is suicide?
Yeah, well, actually, that is what will lead me to transhumanism, that will lead me to a group of scholars who actually believe in that. And that also kind of goes back to the philosophy of Sartre and others, Jean-Paul Sartre and others. The ideas like, close your eyes, leap like a goat, uh, landing on the other side, Albert Camus, The Outsider. Many of you have read these works. Uh, the idea is this, that we did not have a hand in our births. We did not choose our families, our nations, our socio-political contexts in which we were born. Largely, most of our lives, we have uh, been in a flow of time, just because you are doing research doesn't mean that if you don't have money in the family, things are going to run automatically. So maybe we have all made adjustments at many different points of time, maybe compromises also, and that brings us to the understanding that perhaps the only thing that is there in our hands, when we can't even choose the nature of our lives, very few people can do that. If they can risk it all, then maybe you can become Elon Musk or somebody like that. But the general person, very few can actually risk it all, because even if you do, doesn't necessarily mean that your American dream will be fulfilled. 99% cases you might turn into a failure. So the only thing that we can do to make sense of our lives is to choose the manner of death that we want to die. Whether you want to die through a morphine overdose, or whether you want to jump off an aeroplane, or whether you want to drug yourself to death, you can choose the time, the manner, the modality of your life. But well, that's a different way of looking at things. And I told you that the absurdist years were like that, where meaning collapsed like the collapsing London Bridge, where meaning was like a heap of broken images, where meaning itself was contested. If meaning itself is contested, what sense can I make of the sense of things or the order of things? Meaning itself becomes meaningless in that kind of a nihilist position. Then I do not think a teleological understanding of the state of things will really matter. So that was a way of looking at things. But I personally do believe that if I have been given a life, and if I have been given a human life, which has a brain, includes a brain, then I should try to do some good to the planet. It's not possible that I will become a completely dedicated philanthropist. Maybe I don't have the propensity of being that. But I can definitely make my own contribution. You can definitely make your own contribution in your own way. And that can only happen when you do not adopt an anthropocentric point of view. Unfortunately, wherever I look in the academia, elsewhere, in politics, there is always a hierarchy. There is always power politics everywhere. There is always somebody at the top and then different ladders, you know. But if we take a biocentric view of things, as I mentioned in the lecture previously, we are just a part of the entirety. We are just one minuscule. Okay? So don't underestimate yourself. Don't underestimate the value of your life. At the same time, correspondingly, do not overestimate the value of your life. All lives are important. If you can allow that, acknowledge that. You know, we do that in migration studies, that every person has a right to a roof over his head or her head or its head. Nobody should be castigated as you are a refugee. Everybody has a right to a refuge. I have, as Olankar pointed out, I have done an ICSSR major project on homelessness. I have visited some of the weirdest places where homeless people live. I have traveled from, you know, the interiors of Birbhum till the outskirts of Cherrapunji, everywhere. And you can see the expectations of people. You can see the gross injustices done to them at the familial level. So it's just that little bit of aspiration that you can have, which definitely can bring about a difference. At least that's the way I will look at it. I will not look at it from a theorized point of view. Yes, anything else?
So just one last question. I mean, you
Yeah.
are telling to avoid the anthropocentric point of view, but I mean, in the 21st century where we are leading a humanism lifestyle, I mean, we are judging everything on the parameters of humanism. Like this is a inhuman task, or this is a task that is good for humanity. So do you really think it is, I mean, it is possible to avoid the anthropocentric approach completely?
No, I have never said that avoid anything completely. But what I have mentioned is this, that make your own choices judiciously. You know, I find a lot of houses where they have a lot of gadgets in their houses, very costly electronic gadgets, but they do not have a time set on their pumps. When the water pump, when the tank fills up, the water keeps on flowing and nobody's bothered to turn it off. So it's basically not about whether we can, it's whether we will. That is what I was trying to look at, right? And there is nothing that we can't, because if man can't, then who can? On the other hand, if you look at the whole scheme of things from a dystopian perspective, then perhaps everyone can, but man can't, because we are all helpless zombies governed by helplessness. Then I think it makes no sense. Then I think, yes, we must eliminate ourselves. And even if we don't eliminate ourselves, the way things are shaping up with this natural world will be eliminated anyway, because nature is impersonal. The Great Derangement, I'm sure all of you have read other works of climate fiction, climate theory. It's basically that. It's as simple as that. So I think you should make holistic choices, individual choices, and it should all begin from your own standpoint. You know, unless you do it your way, why would others want to do it the way you do? The charity should begin at home, and the start should be from the individual subjective point of view.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else? Feel free. No problem. I will not stop as long as you don't stop.
Sir,
Yeah.
sir, like you talk about waiting for Godot, and in that play, Vladimir and Estragon are waiting for Godot. But if we consider Godot as time, so it is never ending for them because the play, they never meet Godot.
Hmm.
And you also say that time is limited because we as a human being, the anatomy of human body is limited.
Right,
So my
right.
question is time is constant or limited, or it is both?
My first observation is this, that who has identified Godot with time? Uh, has Godot himself told it, or itself told it? Have Vladimir and Estrogor mentioned it? Has the dramatist mentioned it? Or are we coining it? Right. The idea is this, that you live a certain quota of years. So, yes, that definitely makes time measurable. Didn't I mention at the start of my lecture that time is quantifiable, depending on the quantifying praxis you are using? Whether you are using a speedometer, or you are using a clock, or you are using a chronometer, depending on your measuring instrument, you are measuring time. Whether you are measuring in minutes or seconds or nanoseconds, your measure would definitely fall in line. But what is important is that I live that physical expanse of time, but I do not have performance. I do not make sense of my life. I do not get kicks from living the life that I live. I do not get inspired, motivated, rewarded by the things that I do. What am I doing? Waiting. Is waiting an action? Yes. Is waiting an inaction? Yes. So if waiting is both an action and an inaction, what is it? And there is no escape from it. Vladimir and Estragor are waiting for a mysterious entity called Godot, not because they have been appointed, but because they have no other option. They have to wait for him. You may not like your life. Then what can you do? You have to change your life. You have to at least try to do it. Change the things that you concern your life with. But even then, there is no guarantee that everything will alter. And don't Vladimir and Estragor contemplate suicide? Don't they try to do that? Please remember the tree image. At one point of time, it is regenerating with leaves. On the other time, it is turned dead. At one point of time, it's a scaffold for hanging oneself. At the other point of time, it's a crucifix. The sacred and the profane exist together. Your body is at once a holy site as well as the most unholy entity alive at this moment. You are both the sinner and the saint. You are both the saved person and the damned person. So, if you are this complex entity and you are leading a life which is time predicated, and yet you cannot make sense of time because something catastrophic had happened. They have forgotten their past. The past has been erased, just as the way Nagasaki and Hiroshima were erased. I went to Japan in 2015. I have visited those places, and you can't literally fathom that these were places devastated by atomic explosions. They have rebuilt everything. But at that point of time, it was nullified. So, what if you lose your memory? till this point of time. Your mind turns a complete blank. But there are faint echoes, faint visitations. You can very briefly remember certain things, but you can't make a sense of it. There was that vineyard, there was that good life, everything was productive, but suddenly something, this blind white light, what is that? Is that a new birth? Is that a nuclear explosion? Or is that a series of wars? I lost, I entered a semi-comatose state, and this is like a new birth. Then how am I going to make sense of things? They are living on time, but they have been removed from time. And both these things have happened correspondingly. That is the problem in waiting for Godot. The prospect and the problem exist together in waiting for Godot.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Welcome. Good question. Yes, it's a problematic text, definitely, but well, uh, it definitely requires a lot many days to explain that. But I just mentioned the crux of the whole argument. Yeah. Anything else?
Sir, I have a question or observation, that is that Ezra said that there is a time that in modernism era, Ezra said that make it new, and the literatures of that time were trying to express their own thoughts in and their sensibilities in their own literature and literary pieces. But as we see the literature pieces of Sons and Lovers, Waiting for Godot, or Catherine Mansfield Dees, so we can see that there is a constant theory of time being meaningless, literature and um hope and faith is all what can I say? Hope and faith is all absurd. Everything becomes absurd at part of a time, because there are world wars, society is all moved
Yeah.
apart. So we really say that modernism movement, it was called modernism movement, it is still going on, because the postmodernism era that starts from mid 20th century, but the modernism era which we call it, but that
Yeah,
really helps
Sunil, I
that
have
make
got
it.
your point. I've got your point. Yeah, yeah. No, see, there is no definite statement that because something has ended, uh, because something has begun, the previous thing has ended. There is no uh, watertight compartments based on this configuration. Modernist influences are very much there even today. It's there in uh, painting as well. It's there in literature as well. And I think because history repeats itself in cyclical patterns and other forms, because the essence repeats itself, but I think the dimension changes, or rather, the dimension repeats itself, the essence changes. So, on that basis, I think that making things new was not just to show how big an artist you were. You were trying to make things new in order to make sense of the new surroundings you found yourself in. There was this one fine day you got up and you realized that you cannot make sense of the world around you through the traditional filters of understanding that governed your lives previously. You can't do that. You cannot base your configuration of reality or realities through enlightenment logic anymore. You know, you can never say that the West is the best. On one side is the West, and on the other side are the rest, as they call it. Even when we talk not just about the Orient and the Occident, but we talk about the global South and the global North. When we talk about that division nowadays, we understand that a lot of changes come about. Everything is not so Manichaean. Everything is not in terms of binarized understanding. And the West that has vaunted itself, that has self applauded itself on its enlightenment, is the same West that has turned into a wasteland. T.S. Eliot's The Very Wasteland, textually speaking. So, if that is the case, then why make it new? You need newer filters of understanding, critical lenses of understanding to make sense of reality when older, forms of cognizance are no longer holding true. That is the reason why you need to hold on to that. And I believe you mentioned something very briefly about sons and lovers. Well, isn't that the same thing with the case of Paul Morel, with the case of D.H. Lawrence as well? Because Sons and Lovers is one of the novels that I take extreme pleasure in teaching, only for the reason is because it is so unique, but Sons and Lovers would never have been written had D.H. Lawrence not been introduced to Freudian psychoanalysis by Frida, his then girlfriend, and presumably his later wife. So it is that sense of, and psychoanalysis was also doing that. Clinical psychoanalysis was trying to make sense of reality, not in terms of your surroundings, trees, buildings, cars, vehicles. No, that doesn't matter. What matters is the state of your mind. We are not proper nouns. In psychoanalysis, we are all case studies. I am case number this, you are case number that. That way we are configured. We are all objectified. So, of course, it tries to get to the heart of the problems. The problem that is not just in Paul Morel, but the problem that is there perhaps in many an Englishman of that milieu. Sons and Lovers is a very powerful text when it comes to do with masculinity studies, because it takes a lot of introspection at understanding this dereliction that comes to Paul Morel towards the end. The last chapter is called Derelict. That's not something that happens in a Kunstlerroman or in a Bildungsroman. Look at Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. As Stephen Dedalus wants to rebuild the conscience of his race in the smithy of his soul. That's what he says. What does Paul Morel do? He is going towards the factories to work as an industrial worker, leaving the coal mines. That's even horrendous. What about his dream to be an artist? What about his aspiration to become a painter? What happened to those? Now that Miriam is also going away and his mother is dead. But there is an atrophy. There is an atrophy of interests. We need to understand that. Why is that happening? Why is it that I, despite knowing everything, I cannot act on given purposes? Why is it? What is stopping me? What is holding me back? Perhaps a sense of conviction. And the lack of conviction comes from the way the external world looks at you and the way you look at the external world. That is important. The world might think you are the unhappiest person in the world, but deep down you might be the happiest person alive. The world might think that you have everything, but deep down inside you may be the worst pauper alive. Perceptions are not everything. Cognizance is everything. Right. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
So if there are no more questions, I think we have come to the end of the discussion. On behalf of the Department of English and Literary Studies, I would like to thank Dr. Shubhadeep Paul for such an enlightening and thought-provoking talk. And in case of other queries, the students are always, of course, free to get in touch with him. We hope that should such opportunity present itself in the future, you will be there with us once again to maybe talk about some other subject. Thank you, sir. I greatly
You're welcome.
enjoyed the session.
Thank you very much. Stay blessed, all of you. Have a nice day. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, sir has left.
Thank
Now
you,
I
SD.
think OD ma'am, is Indrila ma'am there?
Yes,
Indrila ma'am, I think you can share the link for the feedback.
yes, wait a minute.
Shall we stop the record here?
Wait, OD may stop the recording. I think I can hear Genie, or was that Jigo?